Thank you very much, Mr. Papadopoulos, Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished guests, dear friends. It's really a great honor and a pleasure for me to be here with you today in order to try and give you an update on recent developments with regard to the Cyprus problem. You have here among you some of the most eminent people that are working also with us in preparing our negotiating positions and trying to move the problem towards a settlement, because we all understand and appreciate that this is really a collective effort, and it's not the work of one person. And of course, when you talk about Cyprus, unfortunately, until now, it was not the failure of one person. It was the failure of all of us to achieve concrete results. So now we have embarked in a very, very serious and sustained effort to try at last to have a process that will yield the sought-after result, which is the solution of the Cyprus problem. Of course, one is always skeptical when one recalls the history of the Cyprus problem. And the first question that comes into the minds of people is, what is different this time? Why should one believe that we can this time achieve a result, and a concrete result which has been eluding us for so long? And of course, there are no certainties in life, but at the same time, we honestly believe that there are in place a number of conditions that create an unprecedented momentum and a gathering of circumstances that, with the right alignment of the stars, as people were saying in Ireland at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, can at last put an end to the division of our country. And among those factors, everybody is aware that there is a change in the geopolitical circumstances in our area of the world, and that there is an enhanced American interest, the second being partly the result of the first. There is this importance, the increasing importance of the energy question in Eastern Mediterranean. There is the fact that Cyprus is in the European Union for 10 years now, and also a very, very strong commitment on the part of the leadership to move forward. Of course, those elements are, are laying the ground for an effort that has good prospects, but at the same time, we need to be fully conscious and aware that to talk about an environment which is prone, which is the right environment in order to move forward, is not enough. It's not enough because the biggest difficulty we have when we talk about the Cyprus problem is, how do we funnel into the process those positive circumstances? How do we use this environment and this increasing momentum in order to bring about the necessary movement, in order to get it right this time, in order to have, if you like, a reconciliation of the respective positions and put the problem behind us? I have to say from the outset that our experience so far is not very, very positive in this respect, because we have a lot of frustration exactly because it has not yet proven possible to see at the negotiating table the results of what is happening around. And we have the great honor and the pleasure to have with us today our former Foreign Minister, Ratokos Zakumarkoulis, who makes us the honor to preside over the working group on property and very often participates in the negotiations. And she exactly goes through this incredible phenomenon where everybody tells you, okay, it's good, let's work, let's do it, but then you face a wall and you wonder why. But before coming back to this, I would like to say that since the election of President Anastasiadis, it was very clear that the Greek Cypriot community was ready and willing and determined to embark on a new sustained effort in order to find a settlement. Of course, you all recall that we spent the first months dealing with the economic crisis, and I mean, it was almost impossible to focus on starting the negotiations. This is not to say at all that the Cyprus problem is not the #1 priority of the government and of every person, at least in the Greek Cypriot community. But it was important to tackle urgent economic and very pressing economic issues first in the early months, and only in September it was possible to start this renewed effort, which resulted later on in what we have now ongoing. The initial effort, when it started in September, was meant to be, as I was saying from the beginning, a bit different, not only because of the external circumstances and the political momentum, but also we wanted to make sure that we maximize the chances of success of the effort through first having a very clear understanding on the basis of the sought-after solution, and also, the fundamentals of the settlement. This is when it comes to substance, because our assessment was that previous efforts have not succeeded in bringing about a settlement because of the lack of understanding and the lack of, clarity on many of the most fundamental issues that constitute the Cyprus problem. On the other hand, it was also of utmost importance that we have an understanding on the methodology that we were going to follow in order to make sure that the process is result-oriented. This is why we have suggested from the beginning, and I have to say that the UN team was 100% forthcoming, that before we embark on full-fledged negotiations, we needed to have a kind of a joint statement that will lay the ground both on the substance and on the methodology. The initial idea was for this process to take a couple of months. Eventually, it took more than 5 months to be completed, and it resulted in February in the joint statement you all know. The joint statement is an important document because, as I was saying, it lays the ground for the fully fledged negotiations by, defining very clearly the basis of the sought-after solution in line with the resolutions of the Security Council of the United Nations, but also explaining the main attributes of the settlement, which is, a bi-communal, bi-zonal federation with political equality as defined by the resolutions of the Security Council, with one international legal personality, with one sovereignty and one citizenship. And of course, in order to have this clarity, we had to make some clarifications concerning some other core issues. And so there is in the communiqué some other elements that are also very important, and that is that we are going to have two constituent states that will be created by the Constitution, and this is very, very important because this is, if you like, the answer to the long-held position by the Turkish Cypriot side that we need to have a new partnership of two pre-existing states. So the joint communiqué clarifies that we are going to have two constituent states that will be created by the Constitution. And those constituent states that will be created by the Constitution will exercise the residual powers, but again, as something that will be provided for by the Constitution, and also that in addition to the United Cyprus citizenship, we are going to have internal citizenship of the constituent states, but only as something which will be supplementary and not substituting in any way the United Cyprus citizenship. On process, we had a lot of discussions and a lot of difficulty, but eventually we agreed that all outstanding core issues will be on the table and will be discussed interdependently and in a comprehensive manner. This was essential because, as I was saying before, our assessment was that until now there were a kind of sequential approaches, and as a result there are some issues that, though we were negotiating on and off for almost 40 years, some issues were never discussed. And I give you a couple of examples. One is territory. Though our side presented sometimes maps, and though in the Annan plan there were maps in all versions of the plan, there has never been a discussion on territory. And there has never been a discussion on security and guarantees for almost 40 years. I can add that there has never been a proper discussion on one of the main sticking points in the Cyprus problem, which is the problem of the settlers. We use a euphemism that, we talk about citizenship and we talk about anything else but the real thing, which is the question of the settlers. So we needed to have this new approach, which was meant to allow us to not only to put everything on the table, but through this interdependent discussion to create the conditions for an exercise, if you like, of give and take and trade-offs across the board. Because if one side is satisfied in an area where it attaches utmost importance, it can be more flexible in another area. Then another important element was the European dimension. So far, I mean, in the past, it was almost absent. Sometimes it was ignored. Sometimes, in 2003, 2004, there was a deliberate effort to have a settlement before Cyprus joining the European Union in order to ignore the European factor. And then later on, the European dimension was one of the chapters of the negotiation. For us, today, things are completely different. Cyprus is a member state of the European Union, and this dimension permeates everything we are doing on the Cyprus problem, whatever we are doing on this island, as a matter of fact. So we cannot just say, you know, this is yet another dimension, let's discuss it at the appropriate time. It has to be very clear that the European dimension is overarching. The European dimension is, at the end of the day, the key in order to find proper solutions to many problems, and is the best possible guarantee for our present and our future, which anyway is linked to the membership into the European Union. I have to tell you that there were a lot of resistances on the other side concerning this new European approach, to the extent that, and I'm, you know, reciting here a story I mentioned already many times. In the beginning of September, when we had our first dinner with Alexander Downer, the two sides with Alexander Downer, from the very first moment, I myself mentioned this need to adjust our approach and our perspective to the new reality, which is the participation of Cyprus to the European Union. And there was a very fierce reaction from my Turkish Cypriot interlocutor, who, you know, went, you know, with an outburst of, you know, screaming, etc. He said, you know, it's not because you applied unilaterally to join the European Union and the European Union, for their own reasons, decided to accept you, that you are going to impose on us the fact that we are in the European Union. We don't want to know, we are not members, and this is something we need to negotiate. So very calmly, I put my hands on the table and I said, you know, under such conditions, there is no need that we start this dinner. We are losing our time. Let's not even get this started. Let's go home and forget about this. Done and finish. So, of course, you know, the UN made a very huge effort to keep us at the table, and eventually, and this is the good thing that happened, this mini crisis created some dynamics in the Turkish Cypriot community, and eventually, a few weeks later, we had a proposal that came from them containing the European dimension and mentioning that it was not our proposal, what is in the joint communique. It was a Turkish Cypriot proposal that, you know, the settlement should allow the respect of the fundamental values of the European Union and the implementation of the acquis communautaire throughout the island. So it shows that the will of the Turkish Cypriot community very clearly is to be with us, with the European Union, though their leadership thinks differently. And they think differently because what they want at the end of the day is to have a settlement that will not take into account at all the fact that Cyprus is a member of the European Union. have all kinds of arrangements that are, by their very nature, inconsistent with the acquis communautaire and inconsistent with international standards and obligations. Territory is one of the issues where, along with Mrs. Markoulis, we are facing constantly this kind of approach. And then once we reach a settlement, and they want this to become what they call primary law of the European Union in order to get legal certainty for something which they understand that it is abnormal. And later on, they say, okay, in the future, we will be able to accept the implementation of the acquis communautaire and of the four freedoms of the European Union, etc., etc. But you understand that the result would be completely catastrophic for Cyprus. So for us, when it comes to the European Union, there is no question that we can accept any permanent derogation from the acquis communautaire. There is no question that we accept any additional protocol and any primary law. We believe that we might need and we will need some transitional periods in order for the Turkish Cypriot community to adjust to the competitive environment existing in the European Union. But it has to be very clear that we cannot put in jeopardy our participation into the European Union. At the same time, we honestly believe that it is possible to find a way to reconcile the main principles that are the acceptable principles for the solution of the Cyprus problem, which is the bi-communal, bi-zonal federation with political equality as defined by resolutions of the Security Council, reconcile those principles with the full implementation of the acquis communautaire. It is not through exceptions that we are going to make this reconciliation. It's through the respect of all fundamental human rights and other rights provided for European citizens that we will manage to do this reconciliation with some special arrangements, if you like, fully consistent with the acquis communautaire when it comes to the exercise of some of those political rights. So after the adoption of the joint statement, we embarked in the fully fledged negotiations. We had a first phase of screening, which went on for almost 2 months, where we wanted to have a better understanding of each other's positions, and we had some meetings of the leaders. At the same time, immediately after the adoption of the joint communiqué, we managed for the first time ever to have visits of the negotiators to Ankara and Athens, respectively. Let me tell you that for us it was very important to have access to Ankara because here in Cyprus we all say that the key of the solution is in Ankara. Ankara is the occupying power. They are the ones that ultimately make the decisions when it comes to the Cyprus problem. So it was for us very, very important to be able to talk to them, to make our case, if you like, and also to hear from the horse's mouth their thinking. The condition for this to happen, however, was that the Turkish Cypriot negotiator had to have access to Athens. Of course, we all know, and it is very clear, that Athens and Ankara are not on an equal footing when it comes to the Cyprus problem. It's not Greece that occupies Cyprus. It's not Greece that has settlers. It's not Greece that interferes with what is happening in Cyprus. The only thing Greece does is to offer its support, its generous support to the government of Cyprus and towards a fair and balanced settlement. But since, if you like, the negotiators are projected completely out of the political system, for instance, I myself, I do not represent the government of Cyprus. Okay, I was a diplomat. I took leave of absence, and I was hired by the government of Cyprus in order to be the negotiator, and I was given as a loan to the Greek Cypriot community. So I don't work for the government of Cyprus. This is the legal situation. So since the negotiators do not represent the state, and when it comes to the Turkish Cypriot community, the Turkish Cypriot negotiator only represents the leader of his community. There was no problem of status, if you like, and this facilitated this exchange of visits. So I should add that this first visit, and I can talk only about my visit to Ankara, was really very, very successful, and it made a lot of difference for us in order to have a better understanding of the way the Turkish government is thinking. Of course, needless to say that, the welcome and the hospitality were exceptionally warm, but the atmospherics are not always near the substance. So since then, as I was saying, we had the first phase of screening, and which was very useful in order to get this better understanding of the respective positions, because the feeling on our side was that in the previous effort there was between President Christofias and Mr. Talat, a period during which they had some convergences of their positions, some common ground on many other issues. But eventually, after the election of Dr. Eroglu in 2010, most of those convergences were deconstructed by the new leader, Dr. Eroglu. So it was important for us to know where do we stand on every issue, if you like, in particular in the light of the content of the joint communique. I should also remind you that negotiations between Mr. Christofias and Dr. Eroglu were going on until the beginning of 2012, until such time when the Turkish Cypriot side decided to interrupt the talks, using as a pretext the fact that Cyprus was about to assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union. So I don't believe that they are today legitimized to blame anybody else about any possible delay concerning, if you like, the pace of the negotiations, because if we didn't have talks for a year and a half, it was entirely due to the fact that they interrupted the talks. So when we completed the phase of the screening, we started in the beginning of May a second phase where we have the ambition, if you like, to put on the table very concrete proposals and counter proposals and bridging proposals on all aspects of all issues, and try at the same time through an in-depth negotiation to reduce the gap between the respective positions. And this exercise goes on since then with ups and downs, but certainly with a commitment on both sides to work very, very seriously. I'm not judging the substance of the positions presented, but the fact is that both sides work seriously and both sides submit proposals. We believe, and it was announced during the last meeting of President Anastasiadis with Dr. Eroglu, that if things go well, by the end of July, we should be able to have on the table all our positions on all issues. Unfortunately, this last month we face a real problem which might end up at, having at the end of July a train wreck. And the reason is that though there is this commitment, now we hear from the Turkish Cypriot side the old usual song that they don't want to submit a comprehensive proposal on territory, that they might be willing to discuss some criteria, but they don't want to present a full proposal. And they say that at the same time that they don't want to discuss security and guarantees except with the presence of the guarantor powers. This very clearly goes against the understanding we had and against the joint communique and against the very idea of having everything on the table in order to be able to embark having in front of us the whole picture into the next phase that would entail more trade-offs and give and take. So we hope that in the coming weeks we will manage to overcome this major difficulty, because otherwise we risk to find ourselves in a deadlock. And this certainly would be a pity, because regardless of the divergences we have, as I was saying, there is a very, very serious effort and very serious work that is being done. Now, this is where we stand at the negotiating table, but at the same time, we felt from the beginning that it was of utmost importance that in parallel with the process at the negotiating table, to have some confidence-building measures in place that would help the process and have some game changers that would boost and give a new dynamism to the efforts for the settlement and render, if you like, very, very quickly the process irreversible. And you all know that there was a proposal by President Anastasiadis on what we call the Famagusta package, which at the end of the day, it's not a new proposal. It was just putting together elements that were suggested by our side in the past. And this proposal contained, as a matter of fact, 4 main elements. One is the transfer of the fenced area of Varosha to the United Nations in order to prepare for its return to its legitimate inhabitants. I have to remind everybody that this is something which goes without saying, because there was already an agreement between President Kyprianou and Mr. Dekhtash in 79 about the priority that should be given to the return of the fenced area of Varosha. Later on, there was a very clear mention in Resolution 550. Later on, there was a very clear mention in Resolution 789. So it's not a new story, and it's not something for which the Turkish side should ask something in exchange. But because we are negotiating, it was for us important, if you like, to integrate this proposal into a broader package. So the second element was, if you like, the implementation by Turkey of the Ankara Protocol of its customs union with the European Union. This means that Turkey has at last to comply with its European obligations, which entail that it has to extend to all new member states the provisions of the customs union agreement it has with the union. So Turkey has done so towards all member states except Cyprus. There again, it's an obligation they have, and I mean, it should go without saying again that they have to implement this obligation. Still, we have included this second element in the package, and this, were it to happen, would be very, very important for both countries in terms of shipping, in terms of flights, and in terms of commercial exchanges, and certainly would have created a win-win situation. More than that, were Turkey to implement the Ankara Protocol, immediately and certainly quasi-automatically, the Council of the European Union would not have any reason to continue freezing 8 chapters of the accession negotiations of Turkey, which were frozen exactly because of Turkey's refusal to implement the Ankara Protocol. And for many years, when we were mentioning this to Turkey, and there were behind-the-scenes efforts to have, an understanding on this, Turkey was always telling us, okay, this is important, this is interesting to have the implementation of the Ankara Protocol and the unfreezing of chapters, but it's very difficult to sell because we need also something very clear for the Turkish Cypriots. And what they were alluding to was this regulation concerning direct trade between the Turkish Cypriot community and the European Union. So there is a fourth element in the package, which allows the use of the port of Famagusta for free movement of goods between the Turkish Cypriot community and the European Union. Of course, this would require, if you like, to change the legal basis of the existing Commission proposal on this, and have as a legal basis, as was the request by the Council, the Protocol 10 being as the legal basis. Now, this proposal, was discussed in the margins and as a parallel track. And in addition to this, there were, very sustained efforts by the government of Cyprus to create a better environment for moving forward with various issues. And you have, all of you witnessed since last year, a deliberate effort to streamline the external policy of Cyprus in order to be at the hard core of the European Union. And we have shown also a very clear interest in participating in the Partnership for Peace. Not because it makes a lot of difference for Cyprus itself, but were this to happen, this would take out of the way the fundamental obstacle, if you like, in the relationship between NATO and the European Union. We all know that the real problem is the position of Turkey, but we were ready to help through our application to the Partnership for Peace in order to normalize, if you like, the institutional relationship between the European Union and NATO. Unfortunately, those parallel tracks, and there are others that have to do also with the day-to-day life of the people, and there we have a series of technical committees working, and there are a lot of other efforts going on, and also a lot of work that is taking place from the part of the Commission. You know that every year the European Union spends approximately 30 million euros in order to promote reunification through the economic development of the Turkish Cypriot community and for bi-communal projects. There are also other important international players that are trying to help the United States, European Union partners, Nordic countries, Norway and other, Sweden, Finland, other players are trying to assist in efforts to bring together, in particular, the civil society and the business people and NGOs in order to have in parallel a bottom-up approach in order to, if you like, have a real impact on what is happening at the negotiating table. Unfortunately, as I was saying, the results until now are very, very poor. And the last example in this regard was the visit of the Vice President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, to Cyprus. This visit should be seen from two different angles. The one angle is the bilateral angle, the relationship between Cyprus and the United States. And from this point of view, it was a 100% successful visit. Joe Biden wanted to show that he has not forgotten his long-standing personal relationship with Cyprus since the early 70s. And now that he is vice president, he wanted to show that he continues to be really very interested. The second element from this first angle is that Joe Biden very clearly and publicly made a mention of Cyprus as a strategic partner of the United States. The third element is that he went even beyond and he mentioned Cyprus as a leading strategic partner of the United States in the Eastern Mediterranean, which shows how much importance the United States attach to the changing environment in Eastern Mediterranean, the new prospects that are opening with energy and gas, and the fluidity, the political fluidity in the countries of the region, developments in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Libya, you know, the need to increase energy security for the European Union, etc., etc. So this was the first angle. But then when it comes to the second angle, which was a very strong effort on his part to try and do exactly what I was telling you in the beginning, to funnel into the negotiating process this dynamic, there was a complete failure. A complete failure because of the very clear refusal of the Turkish Cypriot leadership to engage or to accept the slightest meaningful confidence-building measure or to change anything from their previous positions, to the extent that we had to organize a kind of artificial choreography at the end of the dinner with the two leaders, where John Biden had to say alone what the American policy on Cyprus was, because Dr. Eroglu wouldn't accept even to have Joe Biden stating the American position in his presence. This is why Joe Biden, at the end, he spoke about the support of the United States to confidence-building measures, both political but also possibly financial. The support of the United States to every effort that will help reunification, again, through political support and through financial support, and that they want the Famagusta package to move forward, and many other things. But we cannot say that he managed to extract any agreement during this visit concerning the Cyprus problem. We are not going to give up, neither ourselves, and I hope not the United States and other friends that are acting as friends of the good office's mission. We shouldn't give any idea or believe that the way, the United States behave or other players are behaving is to supplement or to replace the effort of the United Nations. The effort for the settlement of the Cyprus problem remains within the framework of the good office's mission of the Secretary General of the United Nations, who works with the leaders of the two communities. But other important international players are acting as friends of the good office's mission, and they come to assist and help the process in moving forward. This is what happened, if you recall, in the final phase of adopting the joint communique, where we had a kind of shuttle diplomacy by the Undersecretary of State, Victoria Nuland, and this is what Vice President Biden tried to do during his visit in Cyprus, and this is what we expect in the near future the Secretary of State, John Kerry, to continue doing. And as far as we are concerned, we are really determined to do our utmost in order to move forward. But as I was saying, I shouldn't be honest if I were not to repeat the warning that we risk to face a wall if we don't manage in the coming weeks to overcome these difficulties concerning presenting position papers and showing flexibility on all aspects of all issues. So with this, I will stop here, and I am, of course, at your disposal for any questions you might have.